Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here, and in today's video we have a very special guest with us. Matt from Matt vs. Japan is here with us, and he is someone that we mentioned briefly in our motivational video. He is pretty adept at Japanese, has been doing Japanese for a while, but Matt,
say that.
why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, hey guys, great to be on. I'm Matt, yeah, just like I said, I have a channel called Matt vs. Japan where I speak about learning Japanese hardcore and really trying to, get to what might be considered a native level or near native level. And just off the bat, I kind of want to make an excuse and say that for the past week, I've been working with these Japanese middle schoolers that just came to the United States. I've been guiding them around all day. I'm pretty much only speaking Japanese, so my brain is totally in Japanese mode right now, and I might suck at English.
Well, I mean, I guess your native level of English is probably still better than our not native level.
Our Scandinavian level of English.
But yeah, it's super cool to have you on here. And, we just had a brief chat before starting this. And just as a brief overview to everyone listening, what we wanted to try and cover here was just some general learning techniques and our perspective and Matt's perspective on how to, I guess, get better at learning, whether this is, doesn't just relate to Japanese or languages.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that we've seen from Matt and read up on, we believe can be applied to, I think, almost all other fields. And this whole immersion thing is something that Henning and I sort of unknowingly did when we were learning 3D in the beginning. And discovering Matt's channel and really puts a lot of emphasis on immersion. I think that's something that struck a chord with both of us on how to learn any subject.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because Matt's work is fantastic when it comes to that, which is just, like I said, super hardcore into languages. And so I've been learning Chinese and trying to use that method, and Morten is currently learning Japanese, and Matt has obviously learned Japanese through that method. And one of the key points is you just want to immerse yourself as much as possible. I see this all the time when we have students who they spend like an hour, 2 hours a day, and they want to learn 3D. And that's just not going to cut it. Yeah. What you have to do is fully immerse yourself as much as possible. And like Morten said here, this is something that we both did without really knowing it. And it was only actually after discovering AJATT, or Always Japanese All the Time, which is what Matt is talking about, that we kind of were able to like find words to it. Yeah. Actually put the technique we've been using for years actually into like a more of an academic way of doing it. So it'd be really interesting just to hear your perspective, Matt, on really immersion.
Do you think maybe you could give a quick introduction to sort of like AJATT for the people?
That'd be very interesting.
Just so.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, so AJATT in general is kind of based off this idea called the input hypothesis by Stephen Krashen, which is that humans acquire language through receiving input in that language that they can comprehend. And so, if we've all been babies and just naturally absorbed our first language in a seemingly magical process, and then there's this really widespread belief nowadays that once you turn 12, 13, 14, you just lose this ability to kind of pick up language unconsciously and naturally, and then you have to learn language as if it was math. But what Stephen Krashen said in his input hypothesis is that you never lose this ability to naturally acquire language unconsciously throughout your entire life. And so even as an adult, if you have the right, like you immerse yourself in the language enough and you get enough input and you learn to understand that input, you can naturally pick up a language as well. And not only is that basically a much better strategy, but the other strategy of treating language like math pretty much just doesn't work, because language isn't math and it's far too complicated for a single human brain to be consciously going over all those rules and trying to, summon up all those different vocabulary that they memorize from lists and stuff like that. And so basically the idea is that the AJATT, All Japanese All the Time, is originally a blog by a man named Katsumoto, and he basically gave the number of aim for 10,000 hours at the language. Like a 4-year-old has spent far more than 10,000 hours in the language. So don't try to complain about how kids are magical and how you're not good at languages until you spent at least 10,000 hours in the language. And that you'll find after spending 10,000 hours in the language that you know it pretty well, pretty naturally. And so I think when talking about immersion with languages, it's a little bit different than talking about it more generally on other skills, because it's literally like you're kind of there is a component there. Basically, what the input hypothesis is saying is that you're picking up language pretty much unconsciously through this input. You're learning words without realizing that you're learning words, and then later you just realize, oh wow, cool, I know this word, I didn't even remember learning it. And so most of the learning doesn't happen really on a conscious level, although there is a lot of stuff happening on the conscious level as well. And so I think when talking about immersion for more other skills you're trying to develop, it's probably going to be a little bit more metaphorical in a sense. But I still think that a lot of the concepts
because I mean, if you're talking about input, just sheer amount of input, let's say, I mean, to the people that watch our videos, it's probably mostly related to 3D.
Yeah.
The amount of input that you get through, like with a software, that you sit and do with your software or the particular skill you want to learn with 3D, the more input you have with that, the better you're going to get at it.
Yeah, basically. Like in terms of input in 3D, like it's, when you're doing Japanese or language, like you could put some anime or like some stuff on the side here. That's a bit harder to do in 3D just because it is more practical. Like it is like learning a trade instead of learning it's not just all in your head. You do actually have the software. But what I was doing when I was learning 3D in terms of input was I was reading forums all the time. And I was putting on tutorials in the background and just really immersing myself as much as I could. I bought magazines and I was watching, not YouTube channels because there wasn't really a YouTube thing back then, but really just like getting as much exposure to it. Like in terms of my like general immersion versus how much time I spent actually doing 3D, it was at least like 2 to 1 because I would just read it all the time, like on the bus. Yeah, really just like really getting in there. Really? So the time I started doing stuff in 3D, I'd already kind of solved a lot of issues. I already knew a lot of stuff about the software. I knew principles. I hadn't done it, but I'd kind of subconsciously learned it in a way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then maybe it does apply even more to language than I thought. Because what, in my mind, you have your ratio between input and output, and in language, it's under the AJATT philosophy. It's very, very heavily skewed to input. You want maybe like 90% of the time to be just listening to the language, reading the language, absorbing the language, and only actually practice speaking 10% of the time, because you can only say what you already know how to say. And if you don't know how to say something, then the solution isn't to just try to make it up, because then you're definitely going to be wrong. It's to find out what like, for example, Japanese people say in this exact situation, because you want to sound Japanese. It's not a creative process. But it seems like for other skills, and I'm sure it's different on every skill, the ideal ratio between input and output would be different and probably more skewed towards output. And you said 2 to 1, which is really interesting. That's still very heavily skewed to input. But it also makes sense to me just because, like even for my example or my experience, like learning video editing, like as I, and I still am not good at video editing at all. I'm still totally crap. And I not even put that much, conscious effort into improving. But I noticed that if I like watch a little tutorial, or even if I'm just watching someone's YouTube video and I'm just paying attention to the editing, I realize like, oh, that's a thing that I could do. Because then I kind of think like, oh, I could figure out how to do that, or I could look up how to do that. And once I know that it is a thing, then when I'm editing, I naturally have the idea of, oh, I could do that thing I saw the other day. And so basically, if you're only doing output, you have to reinvent the wheel. You have to come up with every single thing the first time. Whereas you also have the option of just standing on the shoulders of giants and just seeing what other people thought of. And then like learning how to do something that you have a model for is much easier than just literally just making it up the first time.
I think so you put it
makes a lot of sense to me.
About, it was like a quote from the Dalai Lama or something where it's, I can't remember, something about input and output, which I thought was really interesting. Like if you by speaking, you only know how to repeat the things you already know.
Oh yeah, and by listening you learn learning new things. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, it's essentially like by speaking you say what you already know. By listening you learn actually new stuff.
Yeah, you might learn something new. Yeah.
Like obviously the Dalai Lama wasn't talking about language learning, but I just thought it was funny. Someone actually in my Discord server posted that. I didn't come up with it, so I kind of took credit for it.
We do that all the time, don't worry about it. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about standing on shoulders of giants, because this is something that like I've been experiencing myself so much that there is no reason to reinvent the wheel. So both Morten and I worked with like doing concept art and like 3D models for movies where there's a lot of design work involved here. And if you're trying to reinvent the wheel all the time, like if you're doing some kind of monster creature, you really shouldn't be just thinking monster creature and do that. You should be looking at nature, like really just observing nature. Like that is your input here. If you can go to a zoo, or if you can just watch tons of National Geographic documentaries and like Planet Earth and all these kind of things, that's input. And by the time you're starting your ZBrush sculpt, ZBrush is the software we use for that. By the time you start your actual modeling, you've already kind of solved a lot of the issues.
And nature has solved them for you.
Yeah, exactly. And subconsciously, you kind of know what they're like.
Yeah.
So instead of just assuming that once you're modeling and in the software and drawing that's when the work gets done, I think the work gets done so much just subconsciously before you start. You're kind of planning stuff out in your head. You're getting proper references from nature, from looking at other people and all that.
Yeah.
So I really think the whole input thing is totally valid. Like the ratio 2-to-1. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
I can guarantee you there is no scientific study whatsoever on this when it comes to art. But in my case, it was just like I was saying, I was on the bus. I couldn't do anything. So I was really trying to just. It's the most nerdy thing ever, but it's like you're sitting on a bus and you're like, how could I model this bus in 3D? How could I shade this? How could I light this scene here?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like you're doing stuff it's kind of like subconscious. Your mind just kind of goes there, and you can't really do it directly in 3D because you don't have a computer. But you're kind of solving the issues already there.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities because I did exactly the same thing, and I've noticed that with Japanese as well. Is, you know, when I was learning 3D right in the beginning, you go around and you think, okay, how can I make a lamppost in 3D? You sort of visualize it. Now I walk around, I see a cloud, I'm like, what's the kanji for cloud? You know, and then I start to think, do I know the word for cloud? You know, and then just like trying to solve these tiny puzzles all the time.
Yeah, well, I had a few thoughts listening to you guys talk, and it's all so interesting. But one thing that popped into my mind was, like for... You know, there's that guy, Anders Ericsson, I think's his name, who's like, you know, the guy who's done all that research on mastery, and he's the one who originally came up with the 10,000 hours number. And he came up with the idea of deliberate practice, which is, you know, basically what you have to do to get good. And one of the principles of deliberate practice is that you're building models in your head, like mental representations of the reality. And to the extent in which you have more detailed, more nuanced mental representations, then your performance is better. And it kind of seems like input is a form of building those models. Like if you're in nature and you're paying attention to how a leaf actually looks, and you're on the bus and you're looking how the bus looks, and you ask just by asking that question, right, of how would I render this in 3D, then you're paying attention in a different way than you were before, right? Like the same visual input is in front of you, but you're now looking at it at a different way, and you're actually taking in new information just by asking that question and viewing it through that lens. And now you're actually building a model in your head, which you're going to have later when you're sitting in front of the program. And so it does make it makes so much sense. It's like it seems like input would be magic at first. Like how could you get better just by looking at it? But it really does kind of make sense. And another example of learning through input that is one of my friends told me that his gateway to AJATT was that when he was in college, he got really good at math through reading the solution manuals. And he would never actually solve the problems himself. He would just open up solution manuals and just follow the logic through. But by following the logic, right? It's like as long as you're actually following it in your brain, then you're still building that mental representation of like how you're following the logic, right? A, B, and C, and D. And so once you've seen it done, then you can do it yourself. It's kind of like it's like once you're becoming able to see in a way. This is kind of a metaphor I use for language learning is like before you can understand the language, then it's kind of like you're blind in a way. You hear the language, but it doesn't, it's just noise to you. So you're kind of like a blind man. But once you can understand it, now you can see. And now it's like, okay, if you were thinking of a blind man trying to draw a self-portrait versus one who's sighted looking in the mirror trying to draw a self-portrait, obviously the person who can see is going to have way more success. And so that input is kind of that learning how to see, how to understand. Just looking at it and figuring out what's going on.
We briefly talked about, you and I, just like in terms of how would you do math, like specifically math, like AJATting math, and it is. I mean, I guess it's kind of the same. Like if you want to say something in a perfect native way, you just repeat what you've heard other natives say, and if you want to solve a specific equation, you just do the solution that someone else has already done, and through that you should kind of you should gain an intuitive knowledge of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you still have. You can't just memorize the steps. You still have to like follow the logic. But like, if you have the steps written, and then see, like, if someone just gave you a problem with no solution, right, you'd have to just completely reinvent the wheel on how to solve it, right? And you can do that, but it'd take a long time. But if someone gives you the steps, right, in order to see, okay, how do I go from step like 0 to step A? It's like you still have to make that leap in your head, but it's because it's a smaller leap, it's much easier to do. And then from like A to B and then B to C, and you're still having to go through the steps in your mind and make those logical leaps. But because the leaps are so much smaller, it's so much more natural. But since you're still doing it, you're still like absorbing the logic and understanding. One thing which I think is
incredibly interesting when you're talking about it in your videos and what AJATT is about is, so when I'm doing Chinese now, I'm kind of following what you've been talking about in your videos, which is just keep Chinese on at all times. And you're saying that in the beginning you're not going to get anything. It's just going to be like what you just said now. Like it's just going to be noise. It doesn't mean anything at all. And what I've been realizing now over the last like 3 weeks, 3-4 weeks I've been listening to it is, you're going from not being able to hear any words, it's just a continuous stream.
One continuous stream, yeah.
To being able to pick out the words. I still don't know what the words mean, but it's a hell of an improvement because now I can start looking up the words and I get a way more refined view of what it actually is like. It's like you're talking about you're going from being blind to like, I can see contours. I can't really see exactly what's going on there, but I can kind of... It's starting to get there. And then learning vocab on the side as well is becoming more and more clear. And I think you can do the same thing for 3D as well. Like if you're a beginner in 3D, like we both Morten and I have been teaching introduction to 3D courses. And that is rough because you are just being thrown into it. Like you have no idea what you're doing. It's an incredibly technical software we're using. But by kind of realizing that it's not going to make sense in the beginning, but once you've been exposed to it for a bit, you're just kind of like, the picture is going to start to become more vivid, less blurry, and then it's just going to start to make more sense to you.
I think that whole thing about being okay with not understanding, like accepting that you're not going to understand in the beginning, whether it's languages or you're doing 3D or you want to build a house or whatever. Okay, maybe not building a house.
You should probably know what you're doing if you're building a house.
Shouldn't AJATT that.
No, you shouldn't AJATT houses.
But most of those things, more theoretical things that you want to learn. That is interesting.
Yeah, because we're just coming up with this as we're going along now as well.
Yeah.
Like, essentially, we're just trying to like bridge like language learning and taking the wisdom you got there into 3D and art.
Well, like one of the thing you were just saying now about the other stuff besides building a house, for some reason that's an example left in my head. But it's kind of like you're talking about the difference between a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. And this is something I've been thinking about recently as well. More about with my experience doing video editing than with language learning. But basically, at least where I grew up, in school they taught us to always take a bottom-up approach. Like master level 1 before you go to level 2, and master level 2 before you go to level 3. But basically what all our shared experience is that doesn't really work because you can't have a perfect understanding until you have a vague understanding. And so basically you have to just start on the out. And I think in real learning happens more on kind of a top-down approach where you just kind of get something, you just keep going, you just keep swimming even though you feel like you're half drowning, and then slowly it gets more clear over time. And I think because that's the way that real learning happens, it's the most efficient path is to embrace that like lack of understanding and how blurry everything is, because if you're expecting to have that crystal clear understanding like all the way from step 1, it's just going to hold you back because that's never actually going to happen. And I see that happen with language learning all the time. People like trying to understand the exact nuance between two different words or like exactly how this grammatical pattern works, when it's like, well, even if like for example, wa and ga, right? And there are these two particles in Japanese. Particles are like a part of speech, doesn't matter. But basically there's just these two parts of speech that are very similar. And to a beginner learning Japanese, they have a hard time understanding why they're different. And there's literally been entire books written on the difference between wa and ga. And you could read that whole book and you might kind of know it, but you still wouldn't really know it because in the middle of a conversation, it wouldn't just come out the right way, right? But if you just pretend, like not worry about that difference and maybe even pretend that they're the same for a while, and you get enough like exposure to the language, one day you'll just realize, oh yeah, these two are pretty much completely different. How could you even think that they're the same, right? They're obviously different. And that just happens naturally as your brain slowly picks up more data and like runs statistic analysis on the data and you know, derives those
it's
like
interesting
solutions,
specifically
basically.
that you mentioned wa and ga. It's something that Henning and I talked about today.
Yeah, like a few hours ago.
Yes.
I don't speak any Japanese, so I have no idea what Morten is talking about.
Yeah, so Waga particles, like Matt said, don't worry about it. But because I first tried to learn Japanese when I was like 17 or something. And I, listened to some Japanese music, tried to be a weeb, but didn't work out. And then I did it again, like around 20 or something, I think. And then I started reading more about grammar and specifically wanga and stuff. I still didn't really get it. I mean, I still don't get it. But then the other day, I was reading a sentence on Twitter. Someone had posted like some grammatical sentences on Twitter, like what's correct and what's not correct. And this sentence was something about, something good or something. And in my head, I think, I'd just been watching Terrace House for like a month and a half right now. And
it's all Morten talks about.
I had heard the sentence, like this is the exact sentence before, and they were using the particle ga. And the question was, is wa or ga the correct particle to use? And like in my head, just intuitively, it felt like ga made sense, but I couldn't explain why. And you see the answer, it's like, yeah, you use ga. It's interesting to look at, be like, well, I don't know why it's being used. It just is. And being okay with, again, not really knowing why, I think is a lot better, because I don't understand, but I feel like it's the correct thing.
Yeah. And actually, the interesting thing about learning languages is that kind of knowing but you don't actually know, or knowing but you can't explain how you know, is something, it's so tangible, right? Like, because you can look at, for English, my native language, right? I bring it up in one of my videos that in English we would always say a big red dog, and we'd never say a red big dog. And most English speakers can't explain why that is, except that one sounds good and the other one sounds weird. And there's actually a grammatical rule of like this priority list of like all these different types of nouns and or types of adjectives and what order they go in, like opinion, then size, then shape. I don't remember what it is, but somewhere in my unconscious, that rule actually exists, right? And my brain actually just extracted that from real English without me knowing. And now I can use it and use it to speak correctly and understand if someone else is speaking correctly or not. But it's not conscious knowledge, right? So it's that same thing, but it's so tangible with languages. Whereas I'm sure even with sculpting, right? Like when you're drawing or anything, like how you can look at a shape and just draw the line, right? Like it's not really a conscious thing, right? It's like you try to draw it, and because you're skilled, it looks like how you want it to look. Whereas when someone who's not skilled they try to do the same thing. It's almost like the same process in their mind, except it just doesn't go well. But it's just not as tangible, the fact that the learning has happened. Part of the learning has happened on a kind of subconscious level.
It's so hard to accept, because I've seen that a lot with students that we've sort of like taught or spoken with, is the whole trying to gain mastery of like a very small thing, like you say, like the bottom up approach or bottom to top approach, like, because I really think it holds you back.
Yeah.
If you get to a point, let's say in 3D, where you want to know everything about this one little field before you feel like you can move on, I think that really slows down your progress a lot.
Yeah.
And instead of, I guess, like the whole trying to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, that's going to help a lot of people sort of progress faster.
That's something which is like, this is something that we've been talking about for years, just the two of us, is really the whole be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like that is maybe the one thing which has improved my learning the most. Like I was diving this weekend, and there were a couple of guys there, and of course, it was super uncomfortable. We'd never done it before, and you're breathing underwater, which is insane, and you have pressure and everything. But the two they were freaking out, and they were like, "I want to quit right now." And it sucked just as much for me, but my mind just went to, well, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm used to this feeling for it. When I'm learning Chinese now, of course I suck. I'm going to suck for like 2 years, and it's fine, because I've just accepted that you're just going to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So I think that's a really interesting thing.
Yeah. If you can, just train your mind to interpret that uncomfort as what's going to be future growth. But one other thing about taking the top-down approach is my experience is kind of that learning is a lot like spinning a spider web, where first you have the big outline, right? Like, because a completed spider web has all these little intricate little lines everywhere, right? All these little tiny hexagons or whatever. But you can't start by like completing one little corner of it and have all the hexagons. Well, you haven't even had any of the other infrastructure, right? It's like in order first you need to have the overall infrastructure, and then you can make it the next level of intricacy, and then the next level. But the finest level of intricacy can only exist because it's supported by all the other bigger levels of infrastructure. And I feel like knowledge works that way, where it's like, in order to be fluent in Japanese, you have to know so many little tiny details about words and how they're used and all these other things. But because I'm fluent in Japanese now, I can look up a word once and then be pretty much confident that I'm never going to forget it, or at least for like over a year, I won't forget it, just because it fits in with all my other knowledge. It's like it's like a puzzle piece that's surrounded by all these other puzzle pieces that hold it in place, because I can see, I have a larger framework that I'm coming from. And so it makes so much sense where it's like, yeah, if you, the most efficient way to improve is to focus on first building the very broad infrastructure and then slowly filling it in one by one. And so basically when you're trying to master one little thing before you have any infrastructure, it's just so inefficient because you don't have the other puzzle pieces to hold all the little details in place pretty much.
That's probably like 90% of our videos right there.
Well, yeah, we just repeated what you just said. Replace the spiderweb with a human.
Yeah, exactly. So our general approach to sculpting like the figure is something that we reiterate over and over again, to the point where people on our YouTube channel is like, I feel like you're saying this a lot, yeah, but it's because you need to get it.
Yeah.
It's like you can't start out with making a perfect eye if there's no
pores or wrinkles.
Yeah, if there's no skull to support it.
No.
Like if you start out that way, your sculpt is just gonna look weird.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like you just summed up all of figure sculpting.
Well, that's so awesome to hear, because it really it just repeatedly is proof that these principles apply so broadly. They're kind of underlying principles of how skill is built.
What you're talking about now, actually, with the spiderweb co-web here is super interesting, because that's also kind of how the brain works. Like you learn something new, and now there is like one new entry. It's kind of like you have a web here, and now you have one line to it, one little thread to that item. Like you're learning a new word, and you have one very fragile path to it. But then once you learn a language or you learn a new skill, you just get more and more paths to that one item. So if you're learning, like you're saying, you're learning a new Japanese word now, you already have 99 paths to that which can hold it up. But if I'm learning like Spanish right now, I have one little thing. So if I lose that one thread, the entire word is gone. But if you were to learn in Japanese, or I were to learn something in 3D, you already have like 100 threads holding it up here.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that you talked about at some point, Matt, like the whole dictionary entries.
Yeah, with the RTK, that's the idea of remembering the kanji, which, can't go into too much detail if people aren't interested in Japanese. But basically, that's the ideas of like with learning the Chinese characters. There's three things you need to know about because Japanese and Chinese share the same character set of these thousands of individual characters you have to memorize. And that's normally a huge, barrier for people trying to learn either Japanese or Chinese. But with this one method, they basically have you learn. Because normally there's three pieces of information you need to know for a character. You have to know what it looks like, what it means, and how it's pronounced. But this method says, okay, well, forget how it's pronounced temporarily. Just learn how to write it and what it means. And if you do that for all the characters, since there's only two pieces of information instead of three, it's a lot easier to learn. And then since you'll have what I call a mental dictionary entry for each character, you'll have at least one string going to each character, then filling in the pronunciation later on will be much easier. And of course, it's not that simple, and there are other benefits to
I think
but that's kind of the idea.
So I don't want to get too much off of it on a Japanese tangent, but specifically, like that video that you put up about RTK and Wanikani, that's what made me start AJATT.
Same here.
And because I did Wanikani for like 6 or 8 months, I think. And for people that don't know, like Wanikani is a website where you can also learn the kanji, but in a silly way. And after switching to RTK for learning kanji, like where you make that one dictionary entry instead of trying to learn vocab and sentences and multiple readings and what the character looks like, that just failed horribly. I've been doing this for a month and a half now.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with the kanji that I already know now.
Which is like 1,200 or something.
Which is super cool. And that's not, like we talked about that, Henning and I talked about that. It's not like because I'm some amazing genius that just happens to have Rain Man-like memory. No, it's because your brain is pretty fucking good at remembering if you remember it in the correct way.
Yeah, if you have a system for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you play with it instead of against it, yeah. Yeah, because it's basically just the utilization of that principle of taking a top-down approach. Just make the broad infrastructure, and then filling in the details will become easier later.
For here is really true, because like both Morten and I have been doing 3D for like 15 years, or like forever now, and so we have a bunch of dictionary entries for 3D. Like you have like make a box, and you understand what making a box means. If you're new to 3D, you don't know what making a box means. You're like, why do I want to make a box? Because that's just a box. Well, it turns out it's a building block for everything you're going to do. So if I were to learn a different 3D software today, that's not that hard, because I just have to replace the name of certain things here. It's like, okay, I know how to make a box. How do you make a box in a different 3D software? So it's kind of like, it's a bit weird to phrase it this way, but it's kind of like I'm fluent in 3D, because it's like whenever I have an issue in 3D, it's like there are like 200 different solutions to it. It's like if I were to try to say something in Chinese now, which I'm not fluent, I would be struggling like crazy just to get one sentence up. But if you have somebody who is fluent, they're going to say, well, there's not one way to say this. You have like 30 different ways to say it, like I am hungry. Like that sentence can be phrased in so many different ways if you were fluent in it. In 3D today, if you have a technical issue, or if you just how to approach something, how do you want to light a shot for a movie? You're not like, okay, let's look in the dictionary and let's look at a tutorial. Step 1 at lighting a shot is this. You just have like 200 different approaches. It doesn't matter how you're approaching it, because you just kind of, you have this like intuitive understanding of 3D. So I think the dictionary approach here the dictionary terminology here is very applicable for languages and 3D or general learning alike here.
Yeah, like I think for me, it helped me understand how, like, for whatever reason, there's a huge overlap between people trying to learn Japanese hardcore and people who are coders and who do programming. And so a lot of my followers are programmers, and I get to interact with them a lot. And, so they all say that, once you know one programming language really well, learning another programming language is very simple, right? Like maybe I imagine like if you learning, French, if you know Italian or something. And I think it's because, once learning your first programming language, you're learning how to code, you're learning how to think in a new way, and all these different concepts, and you're making all these different dictionary entries. But then, like, once you know one language, then basically you know what to Google in the other language. Like I heard that if you can write a program in a language that you literally don't know at all, just because you know what to Google, because you basically have the entries for all the different concepts that are there, because fundamentally they're almost the same. They just have different surface level, appearances.
Yeah,
and that's why it's so easy to go from one to the next.
Stuff Henning was talking about, you just say it in a different way. Like if you're learning a language, then you learn what the word is in another language.
You're really spot on here, Matt. We're talking about like the core concepts, because this is something we've seen a fair few times. You have somebody who has really high level of technical skill in a 3D software or whatever it might be, but they can't actually use it. It's like if you were to simplify it, you know how to use your pencil in the craziest way. Imagine a pencil had like 2,000 features, and you would know all the features of the pencil. Doesn't mean you can do a damn thing with it. But then you have people who they know how to draw, but they're just using simple tools. So we see some people actually come from like Academy of Florence when it comes to sculpture. They've just been doing sculpture for years and years, traditional sculpture. And then once they start working with 3D, they're still struggling a bit with pencil, because it's like 2,000 tools on a pencil here, but they have such a good intuitive understanding of it. So the ones who they just get a decent understanding of how the tool works, they're just racing ahead of anyone, regardless of your technical knowledge. These people are just superior in every single way to the people with technical knowledge, because they have such clear dictionary entries.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, another example is my brother plays competitive fighting games, and he was like really good at a Street Fighter at one point, and then he switched over to Super Smash Bros. Melee. And he said it, and he was able to improve really quickly just because he had this, this framework in his mind. He already had the way of thinking. He just had to change all the surface level details pretty much. So totally changing the topic though, because there's something else that I think is really interesting that is worth talking about when it comes to learning. Is basically, I don't know how to phrase it in a good way, but I've noticed that learning seems to happen better when you're not learning for the sake of learning, but you have a task at hand, and learning is just necessary to complete the task. And because, like, basically, this is one of the problems that I realized with the traditional school is I always hated school, but I realized I hated school because everything we were doing felt arbitrary. Like, hey, write this essay so that I can grade it and then throw it away, right? It wasn't very motivating versus like, hey, write this essay because you have a an idea that you want to share with others and that you think is worth spreading, right? It's like, I think the human brain is kind of wired to actually get things done and complete tasks. And when you give it a task, then that's when it's actually going to learn most efficiently, because that's how it was built to learn, right? It's not for the sake of just knowing more, but for actually getting more stuff done. And I think with language, that's why I think it's so important to be not just have it on in the background, but be trying to understand it. And actually by trying to understand your input, then that's what really kicks the brain into gear and to trying to break it down and acquiring it more. And what I noticed with video editing is that I never set out to get good at video editing, but I learn more and more just because I have an idea of something I want to do, and then I figure out how to do it. And I noticed that when I remember everything, that I retain so much of what I learned so well when I'm doing it just because I'm trying to actualize this idea I have in my head. Like, I look it up once or twice, and a lot of times I won't even pay attention to all the little details, like so how does this tool work, blah, blah, blah. I'll just worry about how do I do this exact thing I want to do, and I'll just follow the tutorial step by step, because I'm too impatient to actually learn the whole feature of the program. But then I'll a few videos later, I'll learn a few other effects, and then I'll just have an aha moment where it clicks, and then I see exactly how this part of the program works, or this tool works, and then I can use it really well. But I realized that it happened so smoothly and naturally because I never set out to try to master the program. I was just trying to edit videos and make these ideas kind of happen.
I think that's also part of the reason why, like I say, when you have kids that learn a language in school, we were talking about, you were learning French for 3 years, and it's like when you're learning a language in school, first off, it's maybe you have a language for 2 hours a week or something.
I had French for 1 hour a week when I was 13 to 15.
And other than that, it's exactly like you say, here's an essay, write it out and just do this in French. You said you got a perfect grade going out of French, and you don't speak a word of French.
No.
It's how is that even possible?
Yeah, that's insane to me. But we see this in 3D as well. That you have people who's been doing my French for 3 years, don't speak a word of French, and that's not because it's 10 years ago. That's because I never learned any French. Yeah. Because you are then rewarded for passing tests instead of trying to actually learn something. Yeah,
we see that so much this fucking pisses me off so much. This is one of the biggest issues in the world for me right now. It's because my world is very small when it comes to 3D, so it's mostly 3D related. It's students. I only know of the schools here in the United Kingdom, and the students that go to schools here, they get absolutely butt-fucked.
Yes.
Every single one of them that comes out of school with almost 100% certainty, they can't get a job because they're not good enough to get a job. And now they're in debt because they've spent the last 3 years on a degree that doesn't matter for a field that mostly doesn't care about a degree. It's mostly your skills that matter. And they haven't really learned anything. We've talked to so many students where we give them a brief rundown of, okay, here are the things you need to know to get a job, and they go, oh, I wish someone had told me just those 10 minutes of speaking to someone 3 years ago, because for the last 3 years we've done absolutely nothing. So it's like robbing people first of money and time, and then they give them an education that they can't actually use for anything.
Yeah, it's also it's not even. I think it's even worse than that as well, because it's not just that you can't use your skills for something; it's that you've practiced wrong for 3 years. I think that's. I'm sure that's something you've seen as well for Japanese, Matt. That people have been doing something for a long time, but they just have 3 years of bad habits now.
Yeah, exactly, and I think it makes so much sense in my mind, the whole mechanism of this problem, because it's basically where, if we take languages for example, how there are language tests, right? The Japanese language proficiency test is this official test that's supposed to test how good you are at Japanese, and then give you an official certificate that you can bring to anyone and say, hey, look, I'm this good at Japanese. And so basically what that test is it's trying to extract. It's trying to make some kind of abstracted form of actual Japanese that will somehow try to, if you can do this, then by necessity, you'll be able to do the real thing as well. If you can pass this test, then by necessity, you can read, write, understand, and speak Japanese. But because it's just an abstraction, right? It's extremely incomplete and simplified. It doesn't represent the whole thing. And so basically, if you study, but now that you have this abstracted test, right, that's separate from the real thing, you can now study for the test, right? And because it's just a miniature abstracted version, if you study for the test, you can get really good at the test, but now that doesn't represent actual ability at all. And so people are studying for this test, getting good at the test, passing the test, but they still suck at Japanese because they haven't learned Japanese. They've learned how to pass this test. And that's a completely different skill because the test is this miniature abstracted form. And I think school is basically the same thing where it's like, hey, you want to be a sculptor? Well, here we like made up these classes that if you pass these classes, then that will supposedly mean that you're good at sculpting. But really, you're not. They try to extract the skill of being a good sculptor into these like isolated little bubbles, right? So that they can like spoon feed it to you. Except since that's just a really poor, like miniature abstraction, doing that is pretty much probably unrelated to the actual skill because you're not doing the thing in itself. You're like engaging in this weird abstracted version. And then it doesn't really work. It kind of is similar to the problem of capitalism in a way, where capitalism doesn't directly incentivize like doing good things. It only indirectly incentivizes them by hoping that if you do a good thing, then you'll make a lot of money for it, right? And that works a lot of the time, but then it also ends up people, like making bullshit products and trying to scam people because it all basically also directly incentivizes that, right? It's like because it's not directly, the reward isn't hooked up to doing the actual thing in itself, then you get into a lot of trouble.
I think you're spot on here.
Yeah.
Particularly the whole like passing test thing. Like, so here in the UK, I've seen people who they come out of school, like a bunch of people come out of school with the highest grade you can possibly have, like with honors and like almost like meeting the Queen essentially and
whatever
get
that
knighted,
means.
all that kind of stuff. And then they're like, right, so this fancy piece of paper, let's get a job. And they're like, yeah, you're not good enough. Not even close. Like there seems to be no correlation between your actual skills and the grades you're getting, because the grade you're getting is responding to how good you are at the academic schoolwork, and not how good you are at Japanese or 3D or whatnot. It's like when we got our grade, we went to the same school and it didn't matter because we were already working in the field. We were already working in the film industry. Yeah. So it was just completely irrelevant. And there are a bunch of people who graduate here from schools here who, like, I got a B from our bachelor. Who cares? I was already working in the field. And then you have people who have the highest grade possible and they're not even remotely close to getting a job. Like, there just seems to be no correlation whatsoever with your employability or your skills and your technical grade here, which is insane to me.
I think that's interesting with the whole, like, trying to, like, obviously when you're teaching something in school, like, you boil it down to, okay, here are the points you need to know, and then you can pass the test and whatever. And we've had... like most of the students that we talk to, when we talk to them about like school and stuff, they go, yeah, it was absolute bullshit. I had a friend of mine who she sent me this email that she just graduated from a 3D university, and they wanted like a satisfaction. There was like a satisfaction survey that they sent out, and the satisfaction, like 13% of the students were satisfied with the course. So the school was horrified. Like, why are you all unsatisfied? I was like, well, we didn't learn anything. It's like that's why. Like you learned something. And I think one of the reasons most of these schools, when it comes to 3D, don't teach people what they need to know is that often they hire someone to be a teacher for an extended period of time. And maybe that teacher's been at the school for 10 years. Maybe they used to work in the field, like doing films or doing animation, but they don't anymore. So staying up to date with the relevant information that you need to know is like that kind of gets lost a little bit. And so they start to distill it more and more, and they start to perfect their course, and maybe they're teaching the same thing for the last 5 years. They've been teaching the same thing, but maybe it's out of date.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on here.
Yeah, and they probably didn't learn that way. Like, that's this weird fallacy I see so much in learning, is that teachers don't reflect on how they actually mastered their craft, and then they just randomly make up a new way. Like, because when I was in a similar position to you guys. When I was at college, I was studying Japanese when I was already fluent, and we would have Japanese classes taught by a Japanese woman, right? Who could not. She'd been living in the U.S. for 10 years and she couldn't speak English at all. And I was like, wait, this clearly is a sign that this woman does not know how language learning works, because she's completely failed to learn a language for the like. She hasn't demonstrated that she knows how to learn a language, but no one else saw that as a problem. They're just like, oh no, but she's perfect at Japanese. I was like, yeah, but she doesn't know how to learn Japanese. She doesn't remember.
I think, we talked about that as well in terms of like that. Like if let's say you're learning a language, like you want something explained, right? Natives like in the way I see it, natives might not be the best way. Obviously, listening to natives, I think, is the best way to learn, like how to speak and stuff. But if you want something explained, and you like, if I want Henning to explain like a grammatical point to me in Norwegian, he'll be like, I don't know, you just say the thing, because he never learned. Like, he just natively understood Norwegian.
Yeah.
But if you have someone who's studying a language, trying to understand it, eventually they'll probably look into grammar and see how to explain points and stuff. So I think learning those specific points from someone who's, like you say, mastered another language makes way more sense.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that things for subjects like math or like anatomy that are really more about just like taking information that's out there and getting it into your head and understanding it, maybe traditional learning makes more sense. You know, like you have a teacher who literally teaches you. But I think for actual skills like sculpting or language ability or anything like that, or programming, like you can't really teach someone how to sculpt. You can really probably only, I'm guessing, because at least this is true for language, you can tell me if I'm right or not, you can only really teach someone how they can teach themselves how to sculpt, because you get good through doing the thing and practicing and studying it. And so I think something more like an apprenticeship, I don't know if I'm saying that right, it would probably make more sense for actual skills, where you actually just like someone who already is a master kind of like takes you under their wing, and then just basically like maybe you can start helping them on the project. They'll like just give you little like things that to work on that maybe would actually be relevant, like actually part of a real project they're doing, or maybe they just help you choose a project that is like you want to do, and then just kind of give you tips on how to get you go in the right direction or something like that. Because it's something that you should actually be engaging with the thing itself.
That's
not
exactly
some
what Henning and I are actually doing. So it's really like, obviously we would love to help all the people in the world who do 3D, and with our YouTube channel and stuff, we try to reach as many people as possible, and hopefully maybe like 10% of those they take the important bits away from the videos, and maybe they really learn something.
Yeah, that is a really hard dilemma, because like first of all, of course, by taking all the things that you told those people and help them and just basically putting it into a video, you can probably get most of the benefit out to a extremely large audience. Like that's basically what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel. I don't teach people Japanese. I teach them how they can teach themselves Japanese, because I taught myself Japanese and I'm teaching them to do what I did. But at a certain level, there are always kind of like people's ability to take that theory and put it into practice is always kind of limited by their current actual ability, right? And so there's always going to be things where they're just not going to really fully grasp some of the concepts that you're trying to explain to them, or they're going to just miss something, and they're going to probably waste some time going off in an irrelevant direction before they have that aha moment and realize what you were really trying to say. And having someone to just really guide you one-on-one and like regularly meet with you and keep you on track is probably irreplaceable to a certain extent, although you can get like probably like 80% of the benefit just with those videos, right? Like I didn't have a mentor and I still got good at Japanese, but it still is kind of, I do see in an ideal world, everyone could have some kind of master. That would, I think, for the ultimate, most efficient, optimal progress, that probably is
spot on here.
ideal.
This is something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of like learning, how much you need feedback versus how much you need to actually just learn something. In my view, when it comes to learning, I think having traditional lectures where you have a lecturer who's recited the same lecture 300 times before is doing the same thing again now, I think that is completely pointless. Because first off, he or she is completely sick of saying those things. It's diluted, and it's not a perfected lecture. It is one they've become apathetic towards. And also, once it's done, when I've had a lecture, I mean, it's kind of done. I don't have to do it again. So I really think it should be more like what you're talking about here, where it is apprenticeships. And in terms of like the whole apprenticeship thing, it's kind of like a ship on the ocean where you don't have to actually like change, like go crazy in terms of changing the direction of the ship. You just have to move like what is called a rudder, or move the wheel a little bit just so it changes direction. It's like the easiest thing you can do. Change the wheel like a few degrees and now you have a completely different direction. Now you're going for like the Bahamas instead of Brazil. Completely different direction here, and it's such a small little change you're doing early on. So it's not that I, as a mentor, have to really just take them under my wing and just like really carry them, use so much strength. It's really, well, sometimes you have to do that based on level, but a lot of times it's really just give them a little push.
Yeah.
I've had that recently where there was one person I was teaching and his skills were already good, but it was more, how do I get a job? You have to just model these things here. It was just a little push.
Yeah.
just a little nudge, and that was all it took.
Yeah, that's the whole like standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like you can try to figure that out for yourself. Maybe spend the next like 2 months trying to figure it out. Where if you have a mentor who you can ask, like, how do I do this specific thing? I'll just do this.
Yeah, exactly. I think what you're talking about here with like how we're talking about here, Matt, when it comes to like you in the beginning, you're just kind of trying a different direction, and then you get some feedback on it, and then you get direction here. This is the problem I'm seeing though in education, that this isn't really necessarily a good way of doing it, because now you're just screwing up for like 2 years, and you're now like £40,000 in debt before you figure this out. Like you have like different levels of fuck up you don't want to have. Yeah. You have the whole like, you made a little mistake, and now you learned from that mistake, and then you're in debt for 20 more years of your life now because of that. So I wholly agree that getting like, ideally every person should have one mentor. Which is just not feasible right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, cool. So I know one of the other, you guys wanted to talk about immersion as well, right? Like absolutely. More as a concept. So I have a lot of thoughts with regards to that. I think there's a lot of benefits of immersion, some more intuitive than others. Like I think one, because basically if you're really going after mastery in something, right? Which basically if we're talking about immersion, we probably are, because we're talking about dedicating as much of your life as possible to this one thing. And I used to think when I was younger, I mean, I'm only 23, but like when I was in my teens and I was really immature and was doing Japanese hardcore, I really was like on this mastery trip where I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to master so many different things, I'm going to become the ultimate person. Everyone else who's just playing video games all day, they're weak pussies. They don't understand like I do. And I literally could not understand why everyone wasn't like me. But now I kind of understand where it's like, yeah, if you do want to master something to, beyond just to the point where you can get a job, but like really take it, like trying to reach a peak level of ability, like maximize your potential in this area, that's like a really big sacrifice at the same time. Like, although you're going to get so much through going through that path, you also have to sacrifice so much as well. And that definitely probably isn't for everyone, probably isn't for most people. I kind of recognize now, and it's like you have to have a certain type of personality and be a certain type of person for that to really work for you. Because if you don't really have the inclination towards like basically really focusing on one thing at the expense of others, then it's just going to be painful for you to try to force yourself to do that, and you're probably going to have minimum success and not really be happy doing that. And so I think that's something you have to before we talk about this, that I'm realizing more with AJATT, is you have to kind of be honest at the start and say, is this really what I want? Is this really what's best for me? Because it might not be for a lot of people, and that's the reality. And I didn't understand that before, and I used to just basically like look down on people who like took more moderate approaches. But with that said, the benefit of immersion is that one of the benefits is that by only doing one thing, you're not seeing all the stuff that you're not doing, and so it becomes even more to do that one thing even more. So like with the case of Japanese, if you only watching Japanese TV shows and reading Japanese books and watching Japanese YouTube videos, then you're not seeing any of the newest English YouTube videos or English news articles or the craziest, newest thing that Trump did or whatever. You're not seeing any of that. And so it's not even tempting to look, right? Because the complaint that new people always have when they start doing AJATT is, oh, it's so tempting to do English stuff. I always want to, just check my Facebook, blah, 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 blah. But once you get into it, like you just forget about that because it's not, in your line of vision at all. If it's in the corner of your eye, you're going to be tempted to look at it. But if it's nowhere to be found, then your brain just kind of forgets about it pretty soon. And so that's kind of the biggest benefit, is the more hardcore you go, the easier it is to continue going, because you get this really strong momentum. And the other thing is that the more time you spend on it, the faster you're going to improve. And the feeling of improvement is pretty much the most motivating thing of all, right? Is this feeling of, oh, I put in this work and now I got something tangible out of it. I could put in more work and get even more out of it. And then that's what really keeps you going and makes it really like fulfilling and fun. And so basically the more time you put in, then the more that whole, positive feedback cycle gets going. It's like a snowball that happens more and more and more. And I think one of the other benefits is that I think we all recognize that some subconscious part of our brain is always working on stuff that even though we might not be aware of it, right? Like, you're trying to remember like the name of a person or what a certain word was, and it's on the tip of your tongue, you can't remember. And then like an hour later, it randomly pops into your head, right? After the conversation's all over. Well, that means that like part of your brain for that hour was still, chugging away trying to figure it out, right? Or when you wake up in the morning and you have the answer to a problem you've been working on. And so I think that by really immersing yourself, like more and more of your kind of subconscious resources get devoted to just working on this thing because it becomes so relevant to all parts of your mind. And because like if you're only doing an hour a day, then probably the rest of your day your brain's doing other stuff, right? But if you're working like 6 hours a day on that thing, then you kind of just get consumed by it, and then all your brain really gets on the same page, and you just get so focused, and it kind of has this exponential effect.
Really well with something you said at some point, which was was for learning languages. Oh yeah, like they're like in order something about like it being too hardcore, AJATT being too hardcore, like immersing yourself all the time is too hardcore. But that only really works if there's a softcore way to get to the same level. And obviously I get that you can, like for me right now, I'm full time doing this with Henning, which means that I have more time to sort of allocate to Japanese versus if I just had a regular full-time job. I can study actively for maybe like 4 hours a day, and I can immerse for 12. So that's cool, and that's something that I really want to do. But I do give up most other things to do that. But at the same time, I think it's really fun. If I wanted to, let's say I was starting 3D, and this is something I really was passionate about. Like spending as much time as you possibly can during the day doing that will obviously get you to improve the fastest. But it is a sacrifice, obviously.
I think that's a really important point about the whole sacrificing thing. That I heard a quote which went something like, if you're looking at a really successful person, you need to ask yourself, what did he or she sacrifice to get there? In order to learn Japanese to a fluent level, when were you fluent or basically native, Matt? When you were like 21?
Yeah, around there where I really reached, solid level of fluency.
Reach that level.
Yeah.
I mean, now same with 3D as well. We were already at a fairly decent level when we were 20, 21, 22. In order to get that, you are not going to party every single night. You're not going to like crazy excursion vacations all the time. You need to just be alone for quite some time.
We had that with a friend of ours who we were talking about, okay, how do I get a higher salary and how do I improve my skills? And Henning was like, yeah, but you need to do this and this and this. Oh yeah, but I really want to hang out here and I want to go on this holiday. Like, but then you can't get better.
Like if you thought about becoming better.
If your priority is to, let's pretend you want to get better, but your priorities are, well, I want to go on this holiday here, and I want to go to this party here and there. You can't have all the things.
No.
It's just not possible.
That is really something I've been thinking a lot about, because I mean, we both living in London. This is the third country I'm living in. Like by the time I was 23, I'll be living in 3 countries. I moved as soon as I could from Norway because it's rainy as hell, and then I moved to Denmark, and then I essentially severed connection with most of my friends there. Family you can't see as often. Now in London it's a bit easier because it's just like a 2-hour flight over.
Yeah.
But essentially it means that you just can't see your family as often, and you just have to be dedicated to what it is you want to do. So I think the whole sacrificing thing you're talking about is really spot on here.
But obviously there are different levels. Like you can always choose to not. You could be like 90% hardcore or 80% hardcore. Yeah. It might just take longer, and you might just not get as good. I think it depends on why you're doing the thing you're doing.
Definitely.
No, go on, Matt.
I mean, sorry to cut you off, but like one interesting kind of thing that I just noticed talking to people, because some people, when you talk about this, they get very offended, right? Like they feel like they're being attacked. And I realize it's kind of like, at least in the United States right now, we have this culture where everyone feels very entitled to all these different rights, right? And it's like they feel like entitled to their right to be lazy pretty much, and like always, and like I'll work hard, but not on the weekends, like. And they really, it's like blacked off in their mind, the idea of even giving certain things up, because they feel like so emotionally attached to it. And I really think that's kind of something that should be changed. Like how it's taboo. I feel like it definitely shouldn't be taboo. Definitely should be an option open to everyone. Like definitely, you don't have to do any of this, but don't bullshit yourself and act like it's not even an option.
We've seen that with...
Because it is,
Because this is something we've talked about before in terms of sacrifices. And people have gotten back to us in the comments and said, so I basically can't have a life? I can't do any of these things if I want to learn 3D? It's like, yes, you can, but it depends on to what level you want to master it. if you want to be the best figure sculptor in the world that has ever walked on the surface of the planet
In 2 years,
then maybe you can't have any friends for the next 2 years. I don't know. But I totally get what you're saying about people can see it as an attack.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, they like get mad at you. I'm like, well, I didn't invent the world. I didn't decide that this is how it was going to be. You know,
let's say some of the people that are watching this video and they're getting super pissed now because they're like, well, basically you're calling me lazy. Well, no, you're calling yourself lazy. We're just telling you, if you want to get to this level, do 3D or Japanese, whatever it is, you should put in this amount of hours and this is the kind of work you should do for this long. And I think people who feel like they're getting attacked is because deep down they know that they're not putting in as much work as they could, so they feel like, okay, now he's attacking me.
Yeah, they probably have some cognitive dissonance because they want two different things. That they want to have their cake and eat it too. But because the brain hates cognitive dissonance, it creates a rationalization, right? And most people aren't very honest about all their rationalizations they make. And so then basically we're destroying their rationalization. We're forcing them to become aware of the fact that they're making a sacrifice either way. They're either sacrificing their, leisure time and luxuries, or they're sacrificing their potential to have amazing ability. And that's the painful reality, is that either way you're losing something, and you have to choose what you're losing. Whereas most people aren't consciously making that choice.
It's like, if you wanna learn, let's say you want to do some figure sculpting, like in the back of your head you have this whole like, oh, I just want to go in my bed and Netflix and chill and whatever. And the other part is, no, I should really learn figure sculpting. It's like, so what do you want to do the most?
Yeah.
Do you want to do the thing that will get you to where you want to be, or do you just want to be lazy? It's like, I think it's easy to get distracted by the lazy thing, but you don't really learn anything from it. And I think if you can get over that hurdle and constantly remind yourself that you don't get anything from just lying in your bed and playing video games versus, well, I mean, depending on what you're doing, if you want to be good at video games, then maybe you can learn from that.
Yeah.
But if it's the sculpting, then you just need to put in the hours.
I really want to just reiterate the point that Morten and Matt made before here, that because I think this is super important. The whole like AJATT is too hardcore, or what we're talking about now is too hardcore, and it's like, it's not too hardcore. It's the fact that what you're trying to learn is hardcore. You're trying to learn a whole new skill, like you were talking about in one of your videos, Matt. Like it's like installing a new operating system on your brain. if you're learning how to do anything in 3D, like apart from like simple technical things, if you want to be fluent in 3D, where it's like, okay, this is the shot you want to create, how do you do it? And you have like 30 different options on how to do it. That is genuinely a hard thing to learn. And it's a bunch of, like we were talking about before, core fundamentals like anatomy and like animation, lighting, an artistic eye, how software works and all that. Like it's a bunch of different disciplines combined into that. And that takes a long time to learn. It really is. I mean, I would say that learning 3D to that level is maybe it's not as hardcore as learning Japanese, because that is super hardcore, but I mean it's fairly comparable in terms of how many things you have to learn and how your brain has to operate. You have to become fluent in it, and that just requires a hell of a lot of effort on your part here.
Yeah, I think it's
Definitely.
it is like I would, obviously I'm not fluent in Japanese, so I can't say for sure.
What?
But I would say that learning something like 3D is probably easier than learning Chinese and Japanese, just because it's a more tangible thing. Yeah, there's visual feedback, obviously, which is a big one. Getting to the point in a language, when you're first learning a language, where you start to feel like, oh, I understood that word, or I can start to dissect some of these sentences, that takes a while. Yeah, like that takes a long time of just listening, whereas with 3D, it's a lot more immediate. Yeah, I mean, what you're sculpting, or if you want to make like a body, it might look like a potato in the beginning, but at least you made a potato. Yeah. So...
Yeah, it's like if you're saying, sorry, keep on, Matt.
And one of the other things about that kind of separates language learning from other skills, I think, that I kind of think about, that which is kind of the sad reality of there being such a thing as a native speaker, where you're kind of always compared to a native speaker, and you're pretty much always going to be worse. So it's kind of like like imagine you're learning sculpting, but there is also this such thing as like a sculpting god, and you're just never going to be as good as a sculpting god. You just try to like get kind of close anyway. And so, but it's like, because with art or any other skill, right? It's like there's no such thing as a native speaker. And so, although of course there's going to be people better than you, you're not just like as clearly kind of inferior in a way. It's kind of like you can stand on your own. And so that's kind of the sad reality, is that it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with the fact that I'm always not going to sound fully Japanese. I might always sound a little bit silly here and there. And that is just the nature of language learning as an adult. Although it kind of like the AJATTer in me hates to admit that.
Thank God there's no like, people aren't born and they just come out with like a Monet painting in the womb and they're like, this is great. Yeah, well done.
Yeah, and they also had 10,000 hours more than you at any one point. Shit. I think what you were talking about format, which is very important, which is that once you get more into it, it becomes more fun. Like if you're immersing, like then you're not really seeing all the other stuff. You're just seeing more of the Japanese side, and then you're just learning more of that, and you naturally just become better. It's the same in 3D, that if you're just in the beginning, like you genuinely just can't make anything. You can model like simple things like a can of Coke or a box or whatever, but you really can't do the really cool stuff. But after you've been doing this for a while, you can really start to play around with that. Like when Morten and I are modeling with this, we can have fun with it. You can just like open up a sculpting software and just your Wacom tablet and just like play around, doodle around with that. And that just takes a bit of time to get to, and realizing that that's going to take some time, that's a bit hard. But once you get to that level, and once you can start to play with that, not saying you have to do something super crazy, but then you can start to have more fun with that. It's kind of like I remember when I was learning English, I really wanted to learn how to read Harry Potter because it wasn't available in Norwegian at that point. And in the beginning, I couldn't really read the book. It was Harry Potter number 5, but now suddenly I had a goal with learning it. Like you were saying before, it wasn't just learn tons of vocab. It was, I want to read Harry Potter a year before any other Norwegian because it's so much fun. And it was like I was like 12 or 13 or whatnot, and suddenly I could use it for something. I also remember I was playing Zelda.
Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time, that's the one. I got mega minus point for not remembering that. So I want to play Ocarina of Time, but I didn't understand it because it was in English. But suddenly there was a reason for it. There was a real incentive for it. So instead of just like acing a test or whatnot, I could play Zelda. I could read Harry Potter, like real tangible things. In 3D as well, it's the same thing. You need to have an end goal here, or like at least milestones along the way. You really want to be able to sculpt a cool dragon, or you want to just model a photorealistic scene, or you want to do something with it. And once you get those milestones, and you can really start to have fun with it, that is like the most rewarding thing in the world.
Yeah, because I think that whole milestone thing is good for those moments where you start to question, why have you put in so many hours of your life doing this?
Yeah, that is interesting. It's almost like a paradox, because like I was thinking the other day, like people who do things just as a hobby, right? And they're not very serious about getting good. It's literally just something that they do to enjoy themselves, like on the weekends. But a lot of these kind of hobbies, they still require skill, right? Like fishing or like golfing or whatever. And so I always kind of wondered, like on all these skills, you have to be at a certain level before you even really have the capacity to have fun, like except like bowling and stuff like that. But it's like most skills, you do have to have a certain level before it's even fun. And so if you never like set out with the goal to be like to get really good, how do you somehow get to that point? And it's kind of an interesting paradox where, because I think in my example, like before we started filming this or recording this, I mentioned how when I was younger, I had a phase where I did competitive pen spinning. And I never set out to get good at pen spinning. It was literally like, I just learned one trick, and then I learned another trick, and then before I knew it, I learned a whole bunch of tricks, and then I kind of got sucked in, and I kind of lost perspective on it. But I guess it's kind of like it's hard to kind of intentionally replicate that, getting through that initial period where you suck and it's not that fun.
In competitive pen spinning,
I guess you spin pens a lot.
Yeah, but like, is it like you throw it up like a back of your neck and then you spin it on your head, or something like that? Like, how does it work? Okay.
It's mostly just around your fingers and some of your arm. But yeah, you can link a video. I'll send you guys a video later.
I have a question for you. This is something we briefly talked about before the video. If you were to learn a new skill now, let's say you were like, all right, now I'm going to learn 3D. I'm going to be the dopest 3D artist in the world. How would you set about doing that? Because you obviously have a framework for learning Japanese and now competitive pen spinning. Like, so clearly you have something which worked well for that, and I'll assume that's going to work well for something else as well. How would you set about doing that?
Okay, so a few principles. Like, first and foremost, I would just assume that all conventional wisdom is bullshit. Right. And like, even though I know nothing about it, whenever you how to get good at sculpting or whatever, I would just kind of work off the assumption that whatever I find first and foremost is going to pretty much be bullshit by ignorant people who aren't that good themselves. And I would start like really digging deep to try to find some real theory. And one of the things that I look for when I'm looking for theory is a kind of a map of how to go from 0 to actually being fully proficient. Because a lot of the times when you're looking at advice, it's showing you how to get to level 3 from level 0, but there's nothing from how to get from level 3 to level 99, right? And so I think something good to look for is someone who from the beginning, they're presenting a large picture and they show you how everything's going to fit in. And I think, I don't know, I kind of have a sense for when something's bullshit and when something's not. Just I think from learning Japanese and seeing, going through all these different methods and other things like that. And I feel like there is what you might be able to call a red pill or something kind of like that for like a lot of areas in life where, I mean, most people don't get very far with it. And so it's hard to find the true advice from the people who have gone far. So the first thing I'd look long and hard to try to find really good advice and people who I can trust. And I'd be looking for something that's definitely systematic, like how in AJATT, there's different phases, right? It's like you're going to do this, then this, then this, and explains why you're doing that. And you see like how you're going to get from like one place to another. Because like before I did pen spinning, I did skateboarding pretty intensely when I was like in middle school, but I had no real method to the way I practice. I would just practice random tricks that I thought were cool. And once I'd kind of like half master a trick, I'd move on to the next one without like fully getting it down. And I just, in retrospect, I realized that with the same practice time, I could have improved so much more if I had a more systematic way of practicing. And so I would definitely kind of try to find something systematic like that. And then I think when you, on a more realistic level, I would, like, for example, I've thought about like, and I've talked to my friend who's a programmer, like if I wanted to learn how to program, I'd probably start by reading by skimming 5 introduction to programming books. Instead of like trying to get one book and then master every word in it, I'd just skim like 5, because like we talked about earlier, first you just want to get that very broad infrastructure and not really worry about the details, take the top-down approach. And so I'd like try to get just a very get the raw basic theory through just like skimming a bunch of just trying to absorb as much as I can and just see what sticks. And then I tried to go into getting input in the actual language. Like one of the things my friend told me, he's like, oh, if you follow my instructions, you'll learn how to code so much faster than I did. And what he recommended is that pretty early graduate from the actual beginner textbooks, right? Which are based off of the abstract. They're kind of an abstracted form, like we talked about earlier, and just go to the real thing. Like he said, read the code of programs and just figure out what's actually going on there, and then learn that way through actually getting real input. And so I probably try to learn a lot through, I think if I was learning something like sculpting, I know there's YouTube videos that just have someone working on a full project for hours long, it just has the whole video. I feel like things like that would be really useful. And then just trying to do it myself and then trying to have that balance between practice and theory, because when you have no practice, no actual experience, there's a limit of how much theory you can absorb, right? A lot of it just goes over your head, goes in one ear, out the other, just because you have no where to ground it in. You have no slot to put it in your mental dictionary. And so it's kind of you can't just try to understand everything perfectly before you actually do anything. So you kind of have to have some theory and then do some practice. And then once you have some practice down, you have some experience. Then if you go back to the theory, it's going to mean something different to you now. You're going to read the same exact instructions, but you're going to understand what they mean in a completely different way because you have some kind of reference point now, some kind of perspective on it. And now that will inform your practice a little bit. And now you could practice a little more efficiently, and you practice a little more. And then you go back to the theory and you get even more. So it's kind of like this dialogue between the practice and the theory that I think, especially if you don't have a mentor, that's crucial to be always making sure you're not going off in an irrelevant direction. All theory obviously gets you nowhere, and all practice can lead to you inventing the wheel and wasting a lot of time. So it's kind of those are some broad principles that I would keep in mind.
I agree with everything you just said.
It's interesting. One of the things I picked up what you were talking about is going back to something that you've already read once. The example I want to talk about there is, so the first video I watched from you was the one that destroys Wanikani and Kodansha's learning the kanji. And the first time I watched it, I was just about to start Wanikani again, and I was doing some grammar stuff. So I watched the video, and I was like, this I'm not sure how I feel about this, But I did the kanji stuff that you were talking about anyway, and then the video popped back on my feed like a couple weeks ago, I think. So, and then it started playing, and then I just started listening to it again. And so after about a month or a month and a half of not having heard any of those things, all of that started to make a lot more sense, because now I had some more practical experience with that way of learning.
You got some dictionary entries.
Yeah, exactly. So all of a sudden that information that I'd heard before that I didn't really understand started to make sense to me, which I thought was interesting.
Basically, I think that a lot of people have the experience of, or the way they think about it is, when they're reading a book, the experience they have is entirely based off of the book, right? So they read the first Harry Potter book now, and they read it next year, it's going to be the same experience because the experience is based off the book. But what I realized kind of in the past year or two in my own experience is that whatever experience you have consuming anything, whether it's a movie or a book or a YouTube video, it's half based off of the actual video and half based off of who you are in that exact moment. And so if you become a different person in any way, like if you have more experience or you learn something new, then you will have the experience that will be created from you consuming that same piece of media will be completely different. And so that's why you can't just think that you've seen a movie because you watched it one time, right? Like every time you watch a movie, you'll get more out of it and you'll notice new things. And it's especially true with like instructional material for a skill you're learning, because the more skill you have, then the more valuable it becomes to you, because you actually get what they mean.
And get, let's say there's 100 items in there, you can't understand and all of them. Like if you read it multiple times, then obviously some are going to stick out more than others. And when you return to it, you'll get more and more. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing a video game multiple times. Like play Skyrim. Like you're going to discover multiple different things at so many different places. I go through my school notes maybe like once a year, just from like basic art stuff, because it's all about fundamentals. Fundamentals all the time, and you'll read them in a completely different way every single time, like you're saying, Matt, because you're on a different level. In the beginning, you might get certain things. You might get maybe the most essential stuff here, like the most basic stuff. But then after a while, you're gonna realize there are subtleties to this. You're really gonna get the small little just a small little tips here and there, which you kind of glossed over in the beginning, which are now going to start to make sense.
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on here.
Cool. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you guys want to talk about? We talked about a lot of stuff that felt really productive.
I think we covered most of it. Like essentially, I want to hear your thoughts on how you would learn something and the whole immersion thing as well.
Yeah.
We've already had a little rant about schools. Maybe just the last thing here is like for CG, schools are trash. Basically, they're trash. They're teaching in a completely wrong way. Like I would do them as apprenticeships in a different way, while they were just taught as academic things here today. Yeah. For Japanese, like, what is your experience with schools here? When you look at newly graduates, people with a bachelor or master's degree in Japanese, are they even remotely close to the level you would?
Oh no, complete garbage. Like, it's hard to imagine that it's not worse than what you guys are talking about with school, just because they have no frame. Like, the entire philosophy that AJATT is based off of is input before output, the input hypothesis, like I explained at the beginning, and they have no framework for that at all. They literally treat language like it's math, and then expect that to work. And also the total amount of time that you would spend if you were just a normal student getting like a BA in Japanese at college is like so few hours. If you actually just look at the total number of hours, it's like less than 10 a week in class, and then like maybe they spend another 10 at home. But they never actually do anything in Japanese. Like when I was at school, I'd see these kids, and they'd like, as soon as Japanese class ended, then they'd like put in their headphones, start listening to American music, and then talk about the new American Netflix show they watched. And it was just like, oh, class is over, so Japanese is out the window until next class. like, or unless they do the homework, which has pretty much nothing to do with actual Japanese ability, right? It's like all this corny fill in the blank bullshit that seriously has nothing to do with the real language ability. And then they would graduate and know like close to no Japanese. And also the philosophy of the program was like they just skip certain pretty important things. Like there's something in Japanese called pitch accent, which is pretty important if you want to not sound like shit when you talk. But they just literally ignored that. They didn't mention one word of that in school because their philosophy was, oh, these kids aren't going to get very good anyway, so we might as well not even tell them about this, right? It's like they're going to sound like garbage anyway, so we might as well not waste their time with the stuff that like only is irrelevant if you actually want to sound good. And yeah, that was built into the system. It's pretty crazy when you think about it.
It sounds very similar to my experience with CG schools as well.
Yeah.
Where I think there is like an old quote which says something like, "Don't let your education get away with your learning," or "Don't get school get away with your education," or something like that.
Yeah.
That it seems like, I mean, you were already fluent by the time you started college, and it seems like a very antiquated way of learning today, particularly when you have all the information available on the internet for free or for like less than $1,000 for like all of it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's like in order to get good at Japanese, all you need to do is spend 10,000 hours with Japanese, and and it's like you definitely don't need to go for college to get that Japanese. In fact, they don't have it even if you ask them for it. They only have like English worksheets with like 5 words of Japanese on it.
Approach 3D the same way, that you just first you just have to immerse yourself, and they just don't. So they have a 3D class where you learn about 3D modeling, and then they do the 3D modeling in class, and then they go home and maybe they do the homework, and that's it. Like there's nothing more than that. So in that day, maybe they work with 3D for like 2-3 hours. Yeah. And that's
maybe.
it. Yeah, maybe, right? And
yeah, it seems like the system is built around keeping people in their comfort zone, which seems to be like the fundamental problem. Is like, oh, we couldn't do more than that. That would maybe make people a little bit uncomfortable. So then they don't even consider it. Where obviously all real growth happens outside of your comfort zone. So it's like the whole system as a whole is like completely the antithesis of what it's set out to do in a way.
I think you have like 190 days of actual school a year, maybe. And let's say you work for like 2 hours a week for that, or 2 hours a day. I mean, you're talking like 200-300 or 400 hours of actually doing 3D, in a year.
In a year,
and then you multiply it by like 3, so you're talking about like 1,000 to like 1,200 hours. For your entire education. That is the entire duration you have spent with 3D. And I mean, good luck learning anything this complex in that amount of time. Yeah. It's
exactly. Plus you're paying so much for that tiny amount of time.
It's like, then you're like, let's say you're learning for like 1 hour, and then you go like 23 hours without anything, and then you're learning it again. I think you kind of like, you lose a lot of learning in that hour. You need to just continuously hit it. Yeah. You need to keep it fresh. Otherwise, you're kind of like relearning a bunch of stuff here. So, and also a lot of the lectures you have in our field is absolute trash. Like you just aren't learning relevant things. So yeah, you have 1,000 hours after 3 years of education, but maybe half of them aren't useful. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, school is a business, and they're not really incentivized to give a good education in any real way.
They make money off of each student, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I like to talk to people about this, because in 3D, I know it's not great, but maybe it was only 3D. I had a feeling it wasn't only 3D because I talked to some people in programming, so I know for a fact that in 3D and programming, it's not great. And now Japanese as well.
Sounds like Japanese also not
It sounds like there is a pattern here. It's like if you want to learn like a skill where you don't have to produce anything. Like, I don't want to offend people in HR, but HR. Like, let's say you're doing that where it's like it's more about not so much, it's not a craft per se. Like learning Japanese, that you have to be able to. Just have to be able to do something. There isn't like an exam and you're like, now you're good at the thing. There isn't like a piece of paper. Same with 3D as well. There isn't really a piece of paper which says you know how to do that. And I feel in learning an actual skill instead of just like getting a piece of paper, I feel traditional education is terrible. Yeah. I don't feel they teach you how to actually truly learn something, it's depressing, really.
Yeah, it really is so unfortunate. Like when you sit down, like like we're doing right now, and really contemplate it, it is so mind blowing that it's still like what's considered the go-to route when you want to learn something. And like all the time I hear by friends that don't really know anything about language learning, they're like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about learning French. I'm going to take a class at the community college. Where it's just like, okay, yeah, it's like why it's so kind of weird. That's the go-to in our culture,
particularly the more expensive schools.
Yeah, I remember.
Yes.
If have you ever seen that movie Good Will Hunting? Like, I remember that when I first watched that, I was pretty young, and it left a big impact on me just because in that movie, the main character who's like this basically genius who's really poor and never went to school, but he just hung out in the library and read everything at the library. He like knew all the subjects better than all these kids who went to Harvard, just because he had actually sat down and just spent time reading the library, and he's probably spent way more time actually like engaging with the material than the actual students. But it was just so clear. And now you don't even have to go to the library because we have Wikipedia, and it's kind of like you could learn literally any, like on the skill base, on the actual skills, right? You need to practice them, but that also has nothing to do with school. And it seems like if you were really motivated, right, even on something like math or biology or anything, literally it's all on Wikipedia. So I don't really see why. I mean, I can see there being some benefits, but I cannot see it being worth the cost of going to school besides getting the certificate, which will help you get hired.
Even for our field, yes, a bachelor isn't necessarily relevant. But I had a talk with an old colleague of mine, and he was trying to get, I can't remember if it was permanent residence in Montreal or something. And yeah, his degree was one of the things that counted the most towards like the points you need. You need like a certain amount of points to get the permanent residence or being hired or something. And that's, I mean, he happened to have a degree, but his skills are phenomenal as well. So it's like, it's just, sometimes it just sucks that you have to do that.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, hopefully that will start to slowly change over time. Because I mean, like when you think about it, schools back in like the 1800s or whatever, when there was like one person had all the knowledge, right? And there was like a few amount of books because they couldn't afford to buy books for everyone, and there was no internet. It's like school made sense. It's like, hey, come to this building because literally all the knowledge is contained in this building and nowhere else. And that's where like the school system got started. And it made sense back then, but now obviously it's completely out of date because everyone has infinite access to everything for free. But we haven't really updated the system yet, and so it just kind of seems like things are always take a while to like update because everyone is so attached to the previous way of doing things.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody, a student now, just like last week or so, and we're talking about how expensive school actually is. Because when you want to think like here is around £9,000 a year, which is insane. But if you were to break that down into every single lecture, she said she had done the math, and every single lecture cost £75. Like that's insane.
Like $100 or something.
Yeah, like probably around $100. Every single, like, let's say every single lecture is $100. And if you're in the States as well, if you're going to one of the expensive schools, they're not even like they're 3-4 times as expensive. Like some of them are literally like $250,000 for an art degree. Like you aren't talking every single lecture is like $100. You're talking like it might be $500 for every single lecture, which is ridiculous. So I thoroughly believe that whatever skill it is you want to learn today, you can get a quality education basically for free, or if you spend some money on it for like a few $100, a maximum of $1,000, then you get all the knowledge. I think it's an advantage to actually pay for certain courses because then they've distilled the knowledge. You don't have to like you don't have to find scattered knowledge in all the forums. As long as the knowledge is good and it's done by proper people and not the traditional wisdom like you're talking about, Matt, which you should probably discard. But as long as if you have a small budget and you have the will to learn, I thoroughly believe that you can learn basically everything for free or very cheap online today, which is interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree.
This has been a very productive talk. It's been a very long one. I don't know. Do you have anything you want to end with, Matt?
Not that I can think of. I feel pretty good. I feel like I gotta say all my ideas. So yeah, this was really fun.
I was trying to figure out. This wasn't like a master plan or anything. It was just like, let's poke Matt with a few questions and see what happens.
So I hope that's been informative for people listening.
Yeah, it was always awesome to learn about different fields and see all the different connections and everything. So yeah,
great.
I learned a lot too. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for indulging us for the last hour and a half.
Yeah.